3 weeks passed, and I began to think of my encounter with the lioness as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had documented everything with photographs and video, but I knew most people would find the story hard to believe. Wild lions don't seek human help. They don't trust us with their cubs. They certainly don't bow in gratitude. But everything changed on October 8th when I heard familiar sounds outside my cabin just after sunset. Looked out my window and couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was her, the same lioness with a distinctive scar above her right eye. But she wasn't alone. She had brought her cub, now a healthy, thriving juvenile, and something else that made my heart race. She had brought her entire pride with her. 7 adult lionesses and their cubs were gathered in my yard like they were attending some kind of meeting. The original lioness approached my door and did something that defied every law of predator behavior. She knocked. She actually used her massive paw to tap on my wooden door 3 times. She was announcing her presence and asking for permission to approach. A wild lioness was following human social protocols. I opened the door slowly, and the lioness immediately stepped forward. But instead of the sick cub I had treated weeks earlier, she was carrying something else. It was another cub from a different litter. This little one was showing the same symptoms that her own cub had displayed: infected wounds, labored breathing, and the telltale signs of sepsis. She had brought me another patient, but this time was different. As I knelt to examine the new cub, the other lionesses in the pride began to approach. They formed a semicircle around me, maintaining respectful distances, but clearly wanting to observe the proceedings. I was being evaluated by an entire pride of lions. They were determining whether I was truly worthy of their trust. The cub I was examining belonged to one of the other lionesses in the pride. The biological mother approached cautiously and did something extraordinary. She rubbed her head against the original lioness's shoulder in what appeared to be a gesture of gratitude. She was thanking the matriarch for bringing her sick cub to the human healer. I treated the second cub with the same care I had shown the first. The little male responded well to antibiotics and supportive care. But what happened during his recovery period was even more remarkable than the original encounter. The entire pride took up residence around my cabin. They created a protective perimeter that extended in all directions, making my property the safest place in the entire ecosystem. During the 3 days of the cub's recovery, I witnessed behaviors that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about lion social structure. The pride was sharing resources in ways that had never been documented. They were bringing food not just for me, but for each other. They were grooming cubs that weren't their biological offspring. They were functioning as a true cooperative unit, centered around the care of the sick cub. Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Kenya Wildlife Service arrived to investigate reports of unusual lion behavior in my area. She was initially skeptical of my claims, but after witnessing the pride's behavior firsthand, she became one of the most vocal advocates for recognizing the complex social intelligence of wild lions. She documented everything with professional equipment, and her footage became crucial evidence for the scientific community. The breakthrough moment came when the recovered cub was ready to be reunited with his mother. Instead of a simple handoff, the entire pride participated in a ceremony that can only be described as ritualistic. Each lioness approached the healthy cub and touched him gently with her nose. They were welcoming him back into the community and acknowledging the role that human intervention had played in his survival. But the most incredible development was yet to come. As the pride prepared to leave my property, the original lioness approached me one final time. She was carrying something in her mouth, but it wasn't a cub. It was a stick. A simple piece of wood that she placed at my feet before backing away. Dr. Mitchell later explained that this was unprecedented behavior. The lioness was giving me a gift. She was offering tribute to acknowledge my status as a healer and protector. Over The following month's word spread through the lion population of central Kenya. I began receiving visits from prides I had never seen before, all following the same protocol that the original lioness had established. Approach the cabin present. The sick cub wait for treatment and offer gifts of gratitude. My remote photography cabin had become an unofficial veterinary clinic for the local lion population. The scientific implications were staggering. We were witnessing the development of a new cultural behavior in real time. Lions were not only learning to seek human medical assistance, but were teaching this behavior to their offspring and sharing it with other prides. The original lioness had become the founder of a new tradition in lion society. But the most emotional moment came 6 months after that first midnight encounter. I was reviewing footage from my security cameras when I noticed something that brought tears to my eyes. The original lioness had been visiting my cabin regularly, even when I wasn't there. She would approach the door, sit in the exact spot where she had first waited with her dying cub, and remain there for hours. She was paying her respects. She was maintaining the bond we had formed through shared crisis and healing. The story reached its climax during the dry season when water was scarce and competition was fierce. Instead of fighting over limited resources, the various prides that had sought my help began coordinating their activities. They were sharing information about water sources, avoiding territorial conflicts, and even cooperating in hunts. My cabin had become the center of an unprecedented alliance between traditionally competitive groups. Dr. Mitchell published our findings in the Journal of Animal Behavior, and the response from the international research community was immediate. Teams of scientists from around the world came to study what became known as the Carter Protocol. We were documenting the evolution of interspecies cooperation that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and social learning. The documentary, The Lion Whisperer of Kenya, won 3 Emmy Awards and brought international attention to our work. But for me, the real recognition came from the lions themselves. They had accepted me as an honorary member of their community. Cubs that I had treated as infants would approach me fearlessly as adults. Lionesses would bring their healthy offspring to meet me as if introducing family members. Today, 2 years after I opened my cabin door, to find a lioness waiting with her barely breathing cub. My remote home has become a recognized wildlife sanctuary. The Kenya Wildlife Service has officially designated my property as a research station and provided funding for proper medical equipment and supplies. What started as one desperate mother's midnight visit has grown into a model for human wildlife coexistence. The original lioness still visits regularly. She's now a grandmother, and her extended family includes cubs from multiple generations, all of whom view me as a trusted protector. When I see her approaching my cabin with that familiar, confident stride, I'm reminded of how far we've come from that first night, when she sat outside my door with her dying baby Dot. The trust she showed me that night wasn't just about saving one cub. It was about opening a door between 2 worlds. She taught me that when a mother is desperate enough, she will overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming to seek help wherever she can find it. And sometimes that help comes from the most unlikely source, a human living alone in the wilderness, who was willing to open his door to a wild lioness in the middle of the night. Every evening as the sun sets over the Kenyan savannah, I sit on my porch and watch for movement in the tall grass, because I know that somewhere out there a mother might be making the impossible decision to trust a human with her most precious possession. And when that moment comes, I'll be ready to open my door and provide whatever help I can offer, because that's what family does for each other, regardless of species. The lioness who waited at my door with her barely breathing cub taught me that love, desperation, and hope are universal languages that every parent understands. Her midnight visit changed both of our lives forever and created a bond that continues to grow stronger with each passing day. She showed me that sometimes the most Profound connections are born from the most desperate circumstances. And I've lived alone in the Kenyan wilderness for 6 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I opened my cabin door at 2:43 a.m. on September 14th, 2024. My name is David Carter, and I'm a wildlife photographer who chose isolation over civilization to capture the raw beauty of African wildlife. What happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about the intelligence and desperation of wild animals, and turned my remote cabin into something I never expected. I was deep in sleep when something woke me. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a presence. You develop a sixth sense living alone in predator territory, and every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the security monitor that shows the area around my cabin. What I saw made my blood freeze. A massive lioness was sitting directly in front of my door, like she was waiting for an appointment. She wasn't pacing or showing signs of agitation. She was just sitting there with something small clutched in her mouth. In 6 years of living in the bush, I had never seen a lion approach human habitation voluntarily. They avoid us. It's their survival instinct. But this lioness was different. She was there with purpose, and she was waiting for me to notice her. I watched through the monitor for several minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing. The lioness never moved from her position directly in front of my door. She was patient. She was determined. And she was holding something that I gradually realized was a cub. A tiny motionless cub that appeared to be in serious distress. My training as a wildlife photographer had taught me to observe before acting, but this situation demanded immediate response. I grabbed my emergency medical kit, the one I kept for, treating my own injuries in this remote location, and slowly approached the front door. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the lioness could hear it through the wooden walls. I opened the door slowly, expecting the lioness to bolt at the first sign of human presence. Instead, she looked up at me with eyes that held an intelligence and desperation I had never seen in a wild animal. She didn't move. She didn't threaten. She just sat there holding her cub and waiting for me to understand what she needed. The cub in her mouth was barely alive. I could see its tiny chest moving in rapid, shallow breaths, and its little body was limp with fever. This wasn't a healthy cub being relocated. This was a dying baby, and its mother had somehow identified me as someone who might be able to help. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This lioness had overcome every instinct that told her to fear humans because her maternal desperation was stronger than her survival programming. I knelt down slowly, keeping my movements calm and predictable. The lioness watched my every gesture, but showed no signs of aggression. When I extended my hands toward her cub, she did something that defied everything I knew about predator behavior. She gently placed the dying baby in my palms. A wild lioness had just entrusted me with the most precious thing in her world. The cub was burning with fever and covered in infected wounds. It was a female, maybe 7 weeks old, and she was in critical condition. The wounds looked like bite marks, probably from a hyena attack that had gone wrong. Without immediate medical intervention, this little one would be dead before sunrise. But I wasn't a veterinarian. I was a photographer with basic first aid training, trying to save the life of a wild lion cub while its mother watched. I looked up at the lioness and spoke softly, explaining what I was going to do. I know it sounds crazy, but I told her I needed to take her cub inside to treat her injuries. The lioness tilted her massive head as if she was listening to every word. When I stood up with her cub, she made a sound I had never heard from a lion before. It was soft and questioning, like she was asking if I really could save her baby. Inside my cabin, I worked frantically to stabilize the cub. I cleaned the infected wounds, applied antibiotic ointment, and used a heating pad to raise her dangerously. Low body temperature. I had oral antibiotics from my own medical supplies, and I carefully administered a dose appropriate for her tiny size. Through my window, I could see the lioness hadn't moved. She was maintaining her vigil outside my door, waiting for news about her child. The first few hours were critical. The cub's breathing was labored, and her fever was spiking dangerously high. I used cool compresses to bring her temperature down, and forced small amounts of electrolyte solution into her mouth to combat dehydration. She was fighting for her life, and I was doing everything in my power to help her win that fight. Around dawn, the cub's condition began to stabilize. Her breathing became less labored, her fever started to break, and she opened her eyes for the first time since her arrival. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but I knew the real test would be reuniting her with her mother. Would the lioness accept a cub that had been handled extensively by a human? Would she trust that I had helped rather than harmed her baby? I stepped outside to update the lioness on her cub's progress. She immediately stood up and approached to within 3 meters of me. I could see the desperate hope in her eyes, the way she searched my face for any indication of good news. I held up the cub so she could see her baby was alive and alert. The lioness made a sound that can only be described as a sigh of relief. Over the next 3 days, the cub's recovery was remarkable. Her appetite returned, her playfulness emerged, and she began to show all the signs of a healthy young lion. But during this entire time, the lioness never left my property. She had taken up residence in my yard, creating a protective perimeter around my cabin. She was standing guard, making sure nothing could harm her cub while it recovered. The lioness's behavior during those 3 days was unlike anything documented in wildlife literature. She would approach my cabin windows and peer inside, checking on her cub's progress. She would vocalize softly when she heard the cub mewing, as if she was talking to her baby through the walls. Most remarkably, she began bringing me food. Fresh kills that she would leave near my door before retreating to her watching position. On the 4th morning, I knew it was time for the reunion. The cub was fully recovered and ready to return to the wild. I carried her outside, and the lioness immediately approached. What happened next was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. The mother began grooming her cub, checking every inch of her tiny body, purring so loudly. I could feel the vibrations through the ground. But then the lioness did something that changed my understanding of animal intelligence forever. She looked directly at me and slowly lowered her massive head in what could only be interpreted as a bow of gratitude. She held that position for several seconds, making sure I understood her message. Then she picked up her healthy cub and began to walk toward the tree line. After about 50 meters, she stopped and turned back to look at me. She made a sound that wasn't quite a roar, but wasn't a growl either. It was softer, more melodic. She was saying goodbye and thanked you in the only way she knew how. Then she disappeared into the African bush with her recovered cub, leaving me standing in my doorway, wondering if I had dreamed the entire encounter. But the evidence was all around me. The medical supplies I had used, the makeshift bed I had created. For the cub, the food she had brought me. It had all been real. A wild lioness had sought human help for her dying cub, and I had been chosen to provide that help. The trust she had shown me was beyond